Okay, so today we're going to be talking about learning. Okay, so first of all, how do you define learning? So learning is a relatively permanent change in an organism's behavior due to experience. So first of all, we learn through association, and that means that we understand with certain events that certain events lead to another, such as cause and effect. And an important term we have to understand is habituation. So if the stimulus is repeatedly exposed, uh, then the response is decreased. So this happens a lot in animals. If they are constantly exposed to humans, their once fear and caution of us disappears, right? So that is habituation. And there are three types of learning. There's classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. So classical and operant fall under associative, and this is first-hand experience, while observational, like the name suggests, is observation. So you watch other people do things. So first, we're going to talk about classical conditioning. So this is when we link two or more stimuli and we anticipate an event. One stimuli followed by another results in the events. And this is discovered by Ivan Pavlov, which then led to the birth of behaviorism. If you remember back in Unit 1, behaviorism has everything to do with observable behavior. So in the past, psychology was purely subjective. And that is until behaviorism, where the research is completely objective. So that was a new type of psychology. And so the moment it was objective, everyone just wanted to keep it completely objective, which is why the definition of behaviorism is observable, that is objective. All right, so we have to talk about one of the most famous experiments in classical conditioning called Pavlov's dogs. So this is by the scientist Ivan Pavlov. So basically, in the experiment, Pavlov first began with his dogs. He would ring a bell, which in the beginning meant nothing to the dogs. They wouldn't react to it. Then he fed his dogs every time after the bell was rung, and so that results in dogs salivating because they see food. And after repeatedly doing this, the bells began to mean something to the dogs. So whenever the bell was rung, the dogs began salivating. So this introduces our terms. So first of all, we have neutral stimulus. So this is the stimulus that elicits no response. For example, that's the bell. In the beginning, it doesn't result in anything. And then we have unconditioned stimulus. So this is the natural stimulus that elicits a natural response with no training. So in this case, that would be the food. And then we have unconditioned response. So this is the natural reaction to the natural stimulus. So the unconditioned response in this case is salivating. So the natural reaction to food is salivating. So that's unconditioned. And then after conditioning, after the training, we have the conditioned stimulus. So this is the neutral stimulus that now elicits the response after training. So that is the bell. And then we have the conditioned response, the learned response associated with the conditioned stimulus, which is the bell. And so the conditioned response is salivating. And then we have another case. This is the case of baby Albert. So this experiment is led by John Watson. So basically, and also John Watson actually became the second most well-known behaviorist behind Pavlov. So basically, in the experiment, little Albert was placed in a room and presented with a rat. So every time baby Albert reached for the rat, Watson banged a hammer on metal, which created a very loud sound, which startled little Albert. And this resulted in him getting scared and start crying because he's a baby, right? And After repeatedly doing this, every time a rat is present, little Albert began crying. So this was a really big ethical concern, this experiment, because it caused a lot of harm and discomfort with little Albert, right? And babies don't come with a lot of fears because fears are naturally learned. So this experiment ensured that baby Albert was going to be scared of rodents. So this experiment wasn't the best ethically. However, it did teach us a lot in regards to human classical conditioning. So the key to classical conditioning is that the response is completely natural, usually a biological process, such as, for example, in Pavlov's dogs, the dog salivating, or being scared of sudden loud noises. Those things are very, very natural. They are in our blood. We are born to be scared of loud noises, and dogs are born to salivate when they see food. And then in regards to the variables, the neutral stimulus is the rat, the unconditioned stimulus is a loud bang, the unconditioned response is fear or crying, and the conditioned stimulus is the rat, and the conditioned response is crying. So I want you guys to try. So I want you guys to identify the neutral stimulus, the unconditioned stimulus, the conditioned stimulus, and the conditioned response in this situation. So Ryan was really looking forward to lunch because his mother had prepared a tuna salad sandwich. Unfortunately, the mayo she had used has been left out too long and was spoiled. Not long after eating the sandwich, Ryan felt sick and had to rush to the bathroom. Thereafter, the mere mention of a tuna sandwich would make Ryan nauseous. So why don't you guys take time and identify each of the variables, and you can just privately message that to me. Okay, I'll just give another 2 minutes and then we will look at the answers. All right, so let's look at the answers. All right, so the first one, the neutral stimulus, that is the tuna sandwich. So the reason why it is a tuna sandwich is because it didn't lead to the nausea. It didn't have an effect on um on Ryan in the beginning, right? It was only until after he got sick that the mention of a tuna sandwich would make him nauseous, which makes that the conditioned stimulus. So neutral stimulus is the tuna sandwich. The unconditioned stimulus is the spoiled mayo because that actually elicited a response in Ryan, right, feeling sick. So that is the unconditioned stimulus. And then the unconditioned response is feeling sick. That is something that he can't control, and that is caused by the spoiled mayo. And then the conditioned stimulus is the tuna sandwich, like I mentioned earlier, because it didn't have an effect on him in the beginning, but now that he got sick, the tuna sandwich makes him feel sick, and that is the conditioned response. So now every time he hears the word tuna sandwich, he would get sick or feel nauseous. So a couple more terms we have to talk about. The first one is acquisition. So this is when the neutral stimulus is linked to the unconditioned stimulus. So this is when you start to understand that there is a link between one variable with another. And then we have extinction. So this is when you lose that link between the conditioned response and the conditioned stimulus due to the lack of the unconditioned stimulus. So for example, if Pavlov stopped providing the foods, which is the unconditioned stimulus, and then the bell, which is the conditioned stimulus, will no longer have an effect on the dog salivating. And the salivating is a conditioned response. So once the actual food that leads to the drooling, once the food is not provided anymore, the bell will no longer have an effect. So the conditioned stimulus no longer has an effect. And then we have spontaneous recovery. So this is relinking after extinction. However, association is weakened. So once you kind of understand that there isn't a real association, then it is weakened. And then we have generalization. So this is responding to a stimulus that is similar to the conditioned stimulus. So for example, if the dog's might end up linking the bell and perhaps an alarm as similar. They would respond and they would start drooling if they hear an alarm. And then on the opposite side, we have discrimination. So this is the ability to distinguish between the conditioned stimulus and similar stimulus. So, so for example, the dogs might understand that there is a difference between bells and sirens. So they may drool to the sound of a bell, but they won't drool to the sound of a siren. And then the next kind of learning is operant conditioning. So this is associating your own behavior with consequences. So this is basically rewards and punishments. Actions are often followed by certain consequences, and that could be good or bad, and it can lead to the decrease or an increase of an action or behavior. And this is first kind of established by E.L. Thorndike, who established the law of effect. So rewarded behaviors are more likely to occur. So simply put, if you do something, then get a reward, you're more likely to do it again. And then this is officially established by B.F. Skinner using the Skinner box. So this is so there are numerous experiments using the Skinner box, and that is a contraption where an animal is placed and rewarded or punished in doing certain actions. And then we have shaping. So shaping is using so when reinforcers are used to guide actions to certain desired behavior. So for example, if you want to train a dog to roll over, then you would give them a treat every time they do something that is similar to the action. So first you would give them a treat and when they lay down, and then slowly, if they turn, you might give them another treat. And then eventually, once they are able to do a full rollover, you can keep giving them treats until they start to understand that that is the result that you want. So that is shaping. And then we have reinforcers. So these are anything that strengthens a response. So that is really important. Reinforcers strengthen the behavior or response or action. And there are two types of reinforcers. There are positive reinforcers and there's negative reinforcers. So positive reinforcement strengthens the behavior by adding a pleasurable stimuli. A negative reinforcer strengthens behavior by removing an unpleasant stimuli. And that is the biggest difference. So positive means to add something and negative means to remove something. And it can be good or bad. It doesn't and bad is going to be something we're going to talk about in the next slide, but positive is adding, negative is removing. And then we have the primary reinforcer. So that is something that is natural and unlearned. So things such as food or sleep, that is our biological needs, that is our primary reinforcer. And then we have the secondary reinforcer, that is something that is learned. So things such as money, right? Money is something that we learn is really important in our lives. Technically, it's just a piece of paper and it doesn't have any real value. However, we kind of learn that money can give us food, money can give us water, so that becomes a secondary reinforcer. And then we're going to talk about punishment. So punishment is anything that decreases a response. So you're discouraging something from happening. And then we have positive punishment that discourages the behavior by increasing unwanted stimuli. And a negative punishment basically discourages a behavior by decreasing a pleasant stimuli. So like I said, positive is to add something, negative is to remove something, punishment is to decrease a behavior, and reinforcers to increase a behavior. And those are really important because that can be easily mixed up. Generally, negative has different meanings outside of psychology, but this is what it means in terms of learning. And then there are problems with punishment. It is often looked down upon because sometimes the punishment isn't forgotten, it is just suppressed. So the action isn't, it's just suppressed, but it's still there. And then it also teaches that it's okay to do the behavior sometimes, but not in others. So the behavior still continues, just the punisher just doesn't see it. And then it also teaches fear of the punishment, right? It teaches the person to avoid the punisher, and it also can increase aggressiveness if they are being talked down or if they're being punished. It might lead them to be aggressive to other people or other things. Now I want you guys to give this a try. So I want what does each scenario belong to? So this is a matching. So there are four scenarios. The first one is Jill's teacher takes her phone away because she's constantly on it. The second one, Warren's mom gives him ice cream for cleaning his room without being asked. And then Chris sprays his dog with water for being disruptive. And Jessica's teacher decides to not assign homework because the class was diligent. So you have to match each scenario with either a reinforcement or a punishment. And you guys have 5 minutes to um, privately message me the answers. All right, so let's go in order. So the first one is Jill's teacher takes away her phone because she is constantly on it. So this first one is negative punishment. And that is because the teacher is removing something which is negative, right? Removing is when you remove something that is negative, when you add something that's positive. So the teacher is removing her phone away. So that's negative in order to discourage her to be on her phone, right? So that is punishment. So negative punishment. Everyone did pretty well with this one. And then the next one is Warren's mom gives him ice cream for cleaning his room without being asked. And this one is positive reinforcement. And that is because his mom is giving him something that she's adding something, so that is positive in order to encourage him to keep cleaning up his room, right? And then the next one, a lot of people actually had trouble with this one. So Chris sprays his dog with water for being disruptive, and that is positive punishment. And a lot of times people think that's a negative thing, and it is, but in terms of psychology, he is adding something. So he's adding or spraying the dog with water, which is positive. He's adding a stimuli, and he is trying to he's trying to discourage his dog, so then that is punishment. So this one is positive punishment. And then the next one, Jessica's teacher decided to not assign homework because the class was diligent. This one is negative reinforcement. Jessica's teacher is taking away a stimuli, so she's taking away homework, which not a lot of people like, um, in order to encourage the class to be on their best behavior. So that is reinforcement, so negative reinforcement. Okay, so let's talk about schedules of reinforcement. So there are two types. There's continuous reinforcement and intermittent reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement is reinforcing every time the behavior occurs. And it does have quicker acquisition, so it is easier to catch on. However, it is easy to forget as well. So it is easier to extinguish. And then we have intermittent reinforcement, and that is reinforcing behavior every once in a while. This has slower acquisition, but resists extinction. So there are four types of intermittent reinforcement. The first one is fixed ratio. This is when the reinforcer is given after a set amount of actions. So for example, if you are a factory worker, perhaps you get paid for every 10 units you make on an assembly line. So that is fixed ratio. So every 10 units you are paid. And then the fixed variable is reinforcer given after a random amount of time or a random amount of action. And this is think more of like a slot machine, right? You never know which pull will win, so it is random, and you get awarded at a random amount of action. And then you have fixed interval. So the reinforcer is given after a set amount of time. So that is just, any 9 to 5 job, right? Perhaps you get paid every month, you get paid every 2 weeks. That is fixed interval. And then we have variable interval, and that is a reinforcer given after a random amount of time. So think of fishing. You don't know when exactly you will catch a fish, so it's a random amount of time. So it is really important to know the difference, right? So ratio is a set amount of time action. So however many times you do something, that is ratio. Interval is time, so that is an amount of time that you spend. And then fixed means that it is a set amount of time or set amount of action, while variable is completely random. So the last one, this is observational learning. So this is learning by observing others without direct experience. And we do this a lot when we watch our teachers, for example, math teachers, when we watch them perform an exercise to show you guys how to do a problem. That is observational learning. And then we have modeling. So this is the process of observing and imitating the action. And the reason why we are so good at observing and learning is because we have a thing in our brains called mirror neurons. And these fire when we watch others partake in certain activities. And this is linked to empathy as well. And the most well-known experiment is the Bobo doll experiment, and this is led by Albert Bandura. And this is so in this experiment, a child is placed in the same room as an adult who begins to attack and yell at a doll. And you can see that on the top right. The doll is then provided with a doll of their own, who then proceeded to do nearly the same actions as the adult. So you can see that in the pictures. The first one, the adult is picking up the doll, and so are the children afterwards. And then the next one, the doll is throwing or punching the doll, and that is exactly what the kids are doing. So observational learning is very, very impactful. And that is it for today. So next week we will be talking about cognitive psychology. So that's going to be memory, that's going to be thinking and language. So we have two assignments this week, the operant conditioning worksheet and classical conditioning worksheet. So these are the ones that we kind of did as practice during the presentations, during this presentation. Those exercises that we did, that is what we are doing for homework this week. All right. Thank you for attending. You guys are free to leave.